It's an open book test, your first med school test, and applying late is failing your first med school test. Ask Dr. Gray Pre-Med Q&A brought to you by Blueprint MCAT. How are you today?
Doing very well, thank you. How are you?
I'm excited to talk with you and find out how I can help you. What's going on?
Yes, so I'm a non-traditional medical school applicant. I graduated a year ago from the College of William & Mary, and it's been a very sort of enlightening year because it was this sort of period of time that I needed to realize that I think I want to pursue medicine as a career.
Okay.
And growing up, I never really had any exposure to medicine. I never had any, inclination that I could possibly become a doctor. And so I finally got a chance to work in healthcare and being hands-on with patients, being surrounded by physicians and seeing sort of their role sort of within a community was really inspiring. And it really motivated me to think about what I wanted to become and what I wanted to do with my life. And for as long as I can remember, I've always wanted to give back to my community, and I've always wanted to teach and be an educator or a mentor of some kind. And so I saw that a doctor and what a doctor brought to medicine was largely sort of a unification of all of these roles. And anyway, long story short, it inspired me to pursue medicine. And so now I'm in the application process. And I'm largely lost as to...
Welcome to the club.
Yes. And I understand that's the overwhelming, opinion among non-traditional medical students. And so I guess I'm just curious, what would you recommend as sort of an all-encompassing resource for non-traditional medical students who may be struggling to find direction?
The question is, where's the direction missing? Is it missing, okay, I'm a non-trad, I realized I want to go to medical school, what next? Is it, okay, I'm applying to medical school, but I'm a non-trad? Where in the process is that missing link for you, you think?
I guess for me, I'm so excited, right? And I sort of rushed head on in, not knowing what to expect.
Yep.
And then as I'm rushing in, sort of everything's being thrown at my face all at once. And I'm I didn't realize that I should have taken the MCAT in May so that I could apply in June.
Yeah.
And I didn't realize that there was such a thing as secondaries. I had no idea that was a thing.
Yeah.
Right. So
Got it.
I don't know exactly. I just want to be more prepared, I guess.
Yeah. Where specifically are you in the process?
So I just had to take, this whole past year, I've been taking courses through University of New England's sort of pre-health sciences. It's a sort of create your own post-bac because I needed some prerequisites in order to apply to medical school.
Yep.
I have sort of a subpar undergraduate GPA, sort of complicated, but so I wanted to show that I was capable of actually doing well in medical school. So I did that. Now I'm studying for the MCAT. I have my MCAT August 5th.
Okay.
And I am essentially done with my ACOMAs or AA COMAs and AMCAS applications, but I'm just waiting to submit. So.
Okay. All right. So let's talk big picture. If you weren't submitting, you're new to this process. MapDapp, which is the software platform that I've been working on the last 2 years, is my kind of baby now, is that's the overarching goal of Mapped, is at least MapDapp. So Mapped as the company, we have advising services and all that fun stuff. But MapDapp, the software, is a platform to allow anyone to go create an account and say, hey, I'm planning to start medical school in 2025. And then we have kind of a beta roadmap there right now that says, okay, if you're planning to start medical school in 2025, right, it's not built on freshman, sophomore, junior, senior. It's built on when do you plan on starting medical school, ideally. And some non-trads don't really know that, and we can help with that. But if you plan to start medical school in 2025, then the roadmap kind of works backwards and says, okay, if you're planning to start medical school in 2025, that means you're applying May, June of 2024. You're hopefully taking the MCAT somewhere kind of September to April 2023 to 2024. You're working on letters of recommendations, personal statement, right? It's all in this roadmap as it is right now. And then we'll have the ability to customize the roadmap with your own custom stuff and all that. So, I mean, obviously I've been creating content for 10 years trying to help students. I have the old Pre-Meds podcast trying to help students. So, but that's very overwhelming, right? And I understand that there's 10 years. Where do I start? I have like 1,800 podcast episodes. Like, where do I start? My answer is like, start at episode 1 and just go.
Yeah.
But MapDApp really is the goal for that, and it's basically free. There is a MapDApp Pro that students can sign up if they don't have access to an advisor. They can use one of our advisors right in MapDApp. So that's the big answer. Now let's talk more specifically about you. Okay. So as we're recording this, it's mid-July.
Correct.
You have AMCAS and ACOMAS done, but not submitted. And you're taking the MCAT in August.
I realize there's several disadvantages to this.
There are. Yeah, let's talk about that thought process.
Okay.
So MCAT in August is late. Can I convince you to just wait and apply next year?
I'm all ears. I'm here. You're the expert.
Okay. So really at the end of the day, there's no harm in applying late, taking the MCAT late, other than it costs money and time, right? But with medical school admissions, because most medical schools work off of rolling admissions, the later you turn in your application, the later that your application is complete, meaning that MCAT score is back, which for you is going to be sometime in September, then medical schools are starting at that point to finally go, oh, look, there's this new application here that's complete that we can look at. As soon as you submit your application at this point, again, this is mid-July, you'll start to get secondaries back. And so you need to balance, as a later applicant, submitting your applications, maybe just one school, submitting your applications, knowing that secondaries are going to start coming back, and taking the MCAT and preparing for the MCAT. And so this is why we always recommend taking the MCAT before application season, so you can get it out of the way, so that applications, which take up a massive amount of time, don't get in the way of MCAT prep. And MCAT prep doesn't get in the way of applications. This is like fighting for time, right? Time is our limiting factor here. Yeah. Unfortunately, we need to sleep and eat and poop and all that fun stuff, and we can't be working on essays and MCAT prep all the time at the same time. So you theoretically could submit your applications today. You could play the one-trick pony game and just apply to one school just to submit. Wait till you get your MCAT score back, and then apply to all of the schools that you plan on applying to, assuming your score comes back where you want it to. And in between, when you take the MCAT and when that score comes back, you should be working on secondaries as if you're going to apply to all those schools. If you apply today for AMCAS, again, this is mid-July we're talking, it will probably take 5 or 6 weeks for your application to be verified, if not a little bit longer. Which is fine, because you're not taking the MCAT for a while anyway. If you apply to a COMAS today, your COMAS application will be verified in less than a week, most likely. Which is fine.
Interesting.
But you're not going to get your MCAT score back until September. So there's really no point. Like, you're kind of stuck in purgatory right now. It's like...
it feels like that.
It is. And so it's like, well, what do you do? Right? And so you have two options. You just keep pushing forward and go, you know what? I know this is not the best circumstance, but I'm going to do it anyway. Right? There are people, shocker, that apply late, take the MCAT late, and still get into medical school.
Fingers crossed.
Fingers crossed, toes crossed, everything crossed. Whatever you want.
Okay.
Right? It's a risk-benefit equation, and you know the risks. I just told them to you. The risks are that you're applying later, your application's completed later. Medical schools may be running out of spots to invite students for interviews. You may have a good application, but at that point in the cycle, it's not good enough. Whereas a month or two before then, it would have been good enough for an interview.
Does a late application say anything about the applicant, actually? You know what I mean?
Yeah, no, I know exactly what you mean. I stole this saying that a late application, so the medical school application is your first medical school test. And it's an open book test, right? It's open book. You know what you need to do. You know. It's an open book test, your first med school test, and applying late is failing your first med school test.
Now I'm curious. So obviously, I mentioned this earlier on. I have sort of an interesting trend in my GPA. I started off incredibly strong. I was a 4.0 student, every semester. But I had a head injury, and it sort of, it was a big bump in the road, obviously. And my GPA from that point on was sort of like, and also it was also a bumpy road. It was kind of all up, down. It's just crazy. And so I'm curious, in my application, like, how do you contextualize that sort of spontaneous GPA trend in light of something that was sort of traumatic? And I don't want to, like, I'm not looking for sympathy, but I do want to explain, like, hey, like, this happened. I didn't want it to happen.
Yeah.
But.
Yeah. So there are a couple ways to go about it. You could insert it into your personal statement and just put it in there, right? It depends on whether or not it belongs in there. It depends on your philosophy of a personal statement, but you could put it in there. You could also just wait and hope that medical schools will see that you're academically capable enough, even with a little bit of a rocky road, and let them ask you during an interview. Or the medical school is interested in those types of things, and they ask during a secondary. They'll ask for any sort of anomalies with grades or whatever in a secondary essay, and you talk about it there. There are other opportunities where it's just kind of, is there anything else you want to tell us about your application? Type secondary prompts. Could be a perfect opportunity there. If you're applying to TMDSAS has a whole kind of optional essay where it would be a perfect opportunity for that. But those are the kind of the ways to think about where to insert that type of information.
Yeah, because obviously, I feel the need to explain it without actually going into detail, because I don't want to, I'm not looking for brownie points because I went through this event, but ultimately it was something that I need to sort of use to explain what happened.
Okay. Is it a big part of, or any part of why you want to be a doctor?
It is. And I did put it into my personal statement.
Okay.
It's actually that's how I found you, was how do I write a personal statement? On my 12-hour drive back from Massachusetts. And I was like, oh, I should have started this a while ago. But yes, it was part of the reason why I wanted to pursue medicine, because it was my first exposure to medicine, really. Yeah. It was through the lens of a patient.
Yeah.
I come from such a rural community where everybody's expected to inherit the general store in the corner. So that was very formative. And it's the reason why I studied neuroscience and, ultimately.
Yeah. So then it's a perfect place for your personal statement.
Okay. That's a big boost to my confidence that's going to work out then. So, okay. Well, I want to check out Mapped app. That sounds really interesting. I have never talked to a pre-med counselor ever. The one at our college is particularly scary.
Why?
I've just heard, again, and I'm not going to say any names. Actually, I don't even know their names, so it doesn't even matter. But I just, apparently they give very harsh and realistic sort of expectations.
Harsh and realistic, or harsh unrealistic?
Well, see, I'm not sure. I don't really know.
Yeah.
I just know a friend of mine who, was in communication with this pre-med advisor, and he showed them his MCAT score, and they were like, that's mildly terrible. And I was like, oh, that's a terrible thing to say.
I mean, I'm known for being brutally honest, and
Yes,
it maybe is mildly terrible.
you are.
Yeah.
And so that actually is a good question that comes up in my mind as well. I've listened to you and Brian talk about this on the MCAT podcast as well, but it's nice to just talk to you now in person, over the web.
Yep.
How does a not a bad GPA, but how does a lower GPA look in light of a good MCAT score? Is it sort of like a redemptive factor in terms of an application?
I don't like thinking about things with an application in terms of making up for a good MCAT score, making up for a bad GPA, good GPA, making up for a bad MCAT score. Lots of amazing extracurriculars making up for bad stats. Like, they are all individual pieces of the pie that all matter. Now, theoretically, depending on if a school uses any sort of rubric to score an application, a high MCAT score can make up for a poor GPA, because in their rubric, they could say, hey, a GPA from 2.5 to 3.0 is worth 3 points, and from 3.0 to 3.2 is worth whatever points. And everything is converted into numbers. And so a higher GPA, or a higher MCAT score rather, gives you more numbers, right? More just a higher number. So theoretically, if you want to think about it that way, sure, maybe. But not every school uses rubrics. And so I don't like thinking about it that way. You want the highest GPA possible. You want the highest MCAT score possible, period. And higher always helps, right? There's no 4.0 student where I'm looking at them going, man, you really should have got a 3.9. Right? Right? Yeah. So when you think about it, it's just you have to show academic capability. Whether that 3.2 shows it or a 4.0 shows it, it's a spectrum. A 3.2 with an amazing trend shows academic capability to most schools. They'll be like, great. I don't really care about that final number. You've shown a great trend over time. We're not concerned about your ability. It just depends on the school.
And what is your opinion of this sort of prevailing, I don't know, feeling that ACOMAs, am I saying that right? Is it double ACOMAs?
I say it ACOMAs.
Okay, ACOMAs.
Yeah.
And MCAS.
MCAS, yeah.
Like there's I hate Reddit, but you go on Reddit and you see all of the people talking about how, it's more competitive to get into an MD school versus a DO school, or it's easier because you're not as good of a student to get into DO school and MD school. And like, I don't know if you know, but how do like these different application committees, like, do they take any of this into consideration, or is there?
Do they take what Reddit says into consideration?
I have no idea. It's just, what is the attitude,
Well, they're just looking at stats. That's all they're looking at. And when you look at stats, the average matriculant MCAT score for MD schools through AMCAS, TMDSAS is similar but different. Average MD for matriculants, MCAT score is 511 point something, it's like 6 or 7 or something. The average MCAT score for matriculants to DO schools through a COMIS is closer to a 504, 505. And so they look at that and they say, ooh, correlation equals causation. It's easier to get into a DO school. Mm-hmm. You don't have to be as good of a student. And I think they're right in some ways, but they're wrong in other ways. Just because you have a lower MCAT score doesn't mean you're a worse student. It just means you got a lower MCAT score. The MCAT's a beast. And so historically, DO schools have looked favorably at non-traditional students. Historically, before 4 years ago, 5 years ago now, it's been a while that maybe you don't even know. On the DO application, they used to allow grade replacement. If you took a class, got an F, took the class again, got an A, the DO calculation for your grades wouldn't count the F. And so, exactly. And so lawsuits, lawyers got in the way.
Okay.
So what would happen is you would look at the average GPA for someone going to DO school would be like a lot less than someone going to an MD school. And that's because DO schools had this grade replacement and they would go, hey, we accept you because we want people who are going to have those rich histories of resilience and overcoming and all of this, right? Perseverance, whatever. And so DO schools historically have looked for something different. They're like, the MD market has the perfect 4.0 528 student cornered. We're going to look for some other people, right? And that's just kind of the niche that they carved out for themselves as they were gaining popularity. Mm-hmm. And now they're at a point where if you actually look at, and I haven't looked in a couple of years, I should look again, but as of a couple of years ago, technically it was harder to get into DO schools just by acceptance rate, right? Number of applicants versus number of acceptances, because there are a lot less DO spots than there are MD spots in this country. Yeah. So is it easier to go to a DO school? I don't know. Define easier. Can you be accepted to a DO school with lower stats? Yeah, I think the data supports that. But that doesn't mean you're a worse student. That just probably means that you have some journey behind those stats that maybe the DO schools like a little bit more.
Okay, that's good. Thank you.
Yeah.
I know that I've heard anyways, that you look favorably upon non-traditional students. You personally have soft spot.
I love non-trads.
Well, I love non-trads too, especially being one myself. So I don't think I have any other questions for you. This has been really helpful and just sort of enlightening. And I do need to sit down and think about whether or not this year is the right time to apply, or maybe if next year is the right time to apply. And
again, ultimately, it's time and money. If throwing in an application, which will cost some money, is not going to break the bank, and you can do that affordability wise, then maybe it doesn't hurt to apply, because being a reapplicant isn't bad. So
okay, that's a good thing.
It's just a pain in the butt. You have to kind of massage things and change the personal statement a little and go back to your letter writers and say, hey, can you update? Like, it's just a pain in the butt. But being a reapplicant isn't a bad thing.
That's good to know. I didn't know if reapplying was sort of looked down upon.
No. So again, pre-med students who don't know a lot about statistics, and I don't know a lot about statistics either, but I know not to jump to conclusions. They'll look at the data that the AAMC puts out and which shows reapplicant acceptance rates. It's atrocious. It's like 20% or something last time I saw. So it's really low. And so the conclusion that they draw from that is, oh, being a reapplicant is bad. And I go, well, you can't draw that conclusion, right? There are lots of reasons why. You could have the same crappy application being submitted twice from a stubborn student going, I have a 2.0 GPA and a 490 MCAT, but holistic review is going to get me in because I'm an awesome person, right? You would be super surprised the horrible applications that I see that students submit.
Your application renovation has been very enlightening as well.
Good. We have more awesome series like that coming where we'll help people on the front end of an application too.
Excellent. I hope that for my sake, I don't have to end up on application renovation.
Just don't apply, then you won't be on it.
You're right. You're totally right. Just don't even leave any chances out there.
Yep. Well, good luck. If you do delay the MCAT, or because where you're at now, you should be focusing on AAMC full-length exams. But if you do delay the MCAT and you haven't checked out the Blueprint full-length exams, check those out. But it sounds like you listened to the podcast already.
I am a Blueprint advocate. I myself I have some of their products that are great. They're very awesome.